From the moment James Holton, a self-made millionaire with a dazzling smile and an overconfident swagger, decided to divorce his wife, Clarissa Caldwell, the world knew it was a headline waiting to happen. The glamorous life, the paparazzi-chased dinners, the inexhaustible supply of expensive cars, James had it all. But in the process, he had taken so much from Clarissa. He left her with nearly nothing, assuming she would simply fade into obscurity. Little did he know, fate had other plans. Something stirred in Clarissa's soul, something determined to rise again. And when James discovered who she was dating, everything changed. James Holton's life was a testament to how quickly one could rise from nothing into unimaginable wealth. Born in a quiet neighborhood of Midtown Cleveland, James was raised by a single mother who worked at the local diner. From an early age, he resented his economic disadvantages and vowed he would one day escape that world. He was determined to prove something, not just to his peers, but to anyone who had ever looked down on him. Through sheer grit and cunning, he built a tech startup at the age of 22. With the help of seed investors and a stroke of luck, he sold that startup for $10 million at the tender age of 25. It was the beginning of his meteoric rise. He had good looks, an undeniable charm, and an ambition that knew no bounds. By the time he turned 30, he was a multimillionaire several times over. He possessed an innate ability to turn any project into a commercial success. People gravitated toward him, admired him, and many envied him. Women, in particular, were captivated by his confidence and resources. James basked in their admiration, but when he met Clarissa Caldwell, a determined law student volunteering at a tech conference in San Francisco, something about her genuine spirit lured him in. Unlike many others, Clarissa didn't simply admire him, she challenged him. She saw beyond his money and recognized the complex man behind the glitz. For James, Clarissa was a breath of fresh air. She was brilliant and unapologetically honest. Where others deferred to James's every whim, Clarissa had her own opinions sharp, meticulously researched, and often contrary to his. Their first real conversation occurred in a bustling conference hallway amid the throng of entrepreneurs and potential investors. She did not gush over his accomplishments or fall for his polished lines. Instead, she asked tough, pointed questions about the ethics of his technology. She saw holes in his logic and probed deeper, forcing him to confront possible negative ramifications of what he was creating. In that moment, James realized that Clarissa had something many of his associates lacked, a moral compass that would not be swayed by power or money. Challenged by her intellect, he pursued her tirelessly. They went on coffee dates that turned into hours-long debates on corporate responsibility, legal loopholes, and philanthropic endeavors. James found her sense of justice infuriating yet irresistible. Clarissa, meanwhile, was cautious. She had grown up in a middle-class family that valued hard work, honesty, and empathy. Her father, Gregory Caldwell, was a retired English professor who'd instilled in her a love of learning. Her mother, Pamela, was a social worker whose empathy for the underprivileged had a lasting impression on Clarissa's worldview. Initially, Clarissa didn't think James could ever align with those values, but over time she was seduced by his unrelenting optimism. She believed that beneath his bravado there was a genuine desire to make a mark on the world. And so she said yes when he proposed. The wedding was a glamorous affair in Napa Valley, attended by tech moguls, celebrities, and socialites. The pictures graced gossip magazines and business publications alike, capturing Clarissa looking radiant in her delicate lace gown, and James dashing in his bespoke tuxedo. It felt like a real-life fairy tale, the self-made millionaire and the principled lawyer in training forging a life together. But as the years rolled by, cracks began to show. James's empire expanded at breakneck speed. He invested in real estate, biotech, and cryptocurrency. With every new venture, he pulled in more wealth, more prominence, and also more demands on his time. Meanwhile, Clarissa completed law school and began her work at a non-profit legal clinic, assisting disadvantaged families. She was forced to witness daily the stark reality of poverty and injustice. Torn between her new lavish lifestyle and her work in the trenches, Clarissa tried to maintain her authenticity. She donated generously to charities, used James's connections to advocate for social causes, and fought for those unable to fight for themselves. James claimed to admire her dedication, but deep down he was irritated that she hadn't embraced the high society life he was offering. He wanted a partner who would stand by his side at fundraisers and galas, smiling for the cameras, elevating his stature even further. Instead, Clarissa often declined or arrived late, exhausted from her own demanding work. Disagreements turned into arguments. She questioned the ethics of some of James's business deals, particularly ones that involved questionable labor practices overseas. He bristled at being challenged, especially within his marriage. He wanted to forge a financial legacy that would place him among the elites of American industry. She wanted to help the very people whose hardships were often invisible to those in wealthier circles. Gradually, they found themselves on opposite ends of the moral spectrum. Late-night dinners gave way to lonely meals, with James burying himself in expansion plans and Clarissa throwing herself into her legal battles for clients. Tension simmered, then escalated, until one day, James nonchalantly announced over breakfast that he wanted a divorce. Clarissa stared at him, blinking in shock. She'd known their marriage was shaky, but she never imagined he would end it so coldly. In the following weeks, her heartbreak mixed with disbelief as James moved swiftly and aggressively. His high-powered attorneys ensured that the prenuptial agreement left Clarissa with little. Initially, James had sworn it was a mere formality, that he'd always take care of her. But now, faced with dividing assets, he stuck to every clause that favored him, believing that Clarissa's naive idealism was the real culprit in the marriage's breakdown. The divorce dragged on, turning ugly. Stories began leaking to the tabloids, unverified rumors about Clarissa's supposed infidelity, about James's monstrous business deals, about the alleged tension with James's circle of wealthy friends. Certain tabloids painted Clarissa as a gold digger who had latched on to James for his money. Others described her as a saintly figure, devoting her time to the poor, while James cavorted with new women at posh clubs. Neither representation was fully accurate, yet the media frenzy took its toll on Clarissa's emotional health. She lost weight, her skin grew pale, and her once vibrant smile became increasingly rare. Even so, Clarissa clung to a shred of dignity. She continued at the non-profit legal clinic, working on case after case to protect families from unlawful evictions or advocating for battered spouses. James publicly laughed at what he termed her do-gooder crusade. He told his business associates that Clarissa was wasting her time and that she would eventually tire of playing the self-righteous heroine. His closest friend, Eric Mortimer, sometimes tried to deflect James's harsher comments, but James had hardened his heart. He would sip from a glass of his expensive whiskey, wave dismissively, and change the subject to stock forecasts and new investment opportunities. When the divorce finally concluded, Clarissa was left with the modest savings she'd amassed from her job, a small car, and the belongings she had brought into the marriage. The lavish mansion belonged to James entirely. The timeshare in the Bahamas was in his company's name. She wouldn't be able to afford the penthouse in Manhattan or the beach house in Santa Monica. Most humiliatingly, James forced the sale of the quiet suburban home Clarissa had purchased herself before their marriage, ensuring the legal ties were severed in his favor. He walked away from the relationship with his status and empire intact. She, on the other hand, was forced to start over. In the aftermath, Clarissa moved to a less affluent neighborhood on the outskirts of San Francisco. She found a small studio apartment with outdated fixtures and minimal furniture, a stark contrast to the opulence of the life she had once shared with James. Yet, for the first time in years, she felt a curious sense of freedom. No longer tethered to a social life that stifled her, Clarissa reclaimed her independence. She worked extra hours, taking on more clients at the non-profit. Her colleagues rallied around her, and she formed new friendships with people who valued her for who she was, not for her association with a wealthy husband. Months turned into a year. Clarissa rarely saw James, except in fleeting glimpses on gossip websites or business news segments. He was pictured smiling on red carpets, accompanied by glamorous women whose designer gowns and coiffed hair spoke of the high life. She heard rumors that he was dating an heiress from a pharmaceutical dynasty. Then another rumor linked him to a European pop star. Each new rumor made Clarissa's heart lurch, not out of jealousy, but from the lingering hurt at how quickly James seemed to have replaced her. Nevertheless, she pushed forward. Despite her resilience, she had her moments of deep sorrow. Late at night, alone in her tiny apartment, she would remember the early days of their relationship, the thoughtful discussions over coffee, the gentle ways James would stroke her hair, the nights spent laughing at silly jokes until they fell asleep. She grieved the dream they once shared, a dream of building something meaningful together, merging financial success with social responsibility. That dream felt like a distant fairy tale. On one rainy afternoon, Clarissa received a call from her old law school friend, Serena Townsend. Serena had relocated to Los Angeles to work at a prestigious law firm, but they had kept in touch sporadically. She told Clarissa about a job opportunity. A well-known philanthropic organization, the Harrington Foundation, was looking for a director of legal affairs. The foundation needed someone with a nuanced understanding of social justice, someone capable of building alliances with NGOs and local governments. Serena believed Clarissa would be a perfect fit. It was a step up from her current role, a chance to help more people on a larger scale, while being paid a salary that reflected her skills. Clarissa's eyes lit up. The position was in Los Angeles, a city brimming with big dreams, but also rife with the same inequality she had been fighting. She interviewed via video conference and, despite stiff competition, she impressed the board of the Harrington Foundation. They admired her fierce passion and her track record at the non-profit clinic. Within weeks, Clarissa received the job offer. She was stunned. It felt like a chance to redefine her life, to create impact on a grander scale. With careful thought, she accepted and prepared to move. It was a scary leap into the unknown, but one that filled her with renewed hope. Clarissa moved to Los Angeles with the help of two close friends, Rachel and Tom, who drove her down the scenic coastal highway. She carried only the essentials in a rented truck, her modest clothing, law books, a treasured painting from her mother, and a few keepsakes from her old life. As she set foot in La, she felt the city's peculiar energy, fast-paced yet laid back, gritty yet glamorous. The Harrington Foundation welcomed her warmly, providing a small relocation stipend and assisting with finding temporary housing. She ended up in a cozy rental in Silver Lake, nestled among creative types and social activists. It was a community that valued more than status. Her new role demanded a lot. She oversaw contracts, negotiated partnerships with local nonprofits, traveled internationally for philanthropic missions, and managed a team of dedicated attorneys. The hours were intense, but Clarissa thrived. She was part of large-scale projects, building shelters, promoting educational reforms, funding medical clinics in impoverished regions. She had found her calling in a bigger arena. Her immediate superiors, impressed by her commitment, soon entrusted her with even more significant responsibilities. It was at a charity gala, orchestrated by the Harrington Foundation at an upscale Beverly Hills venue, that Clarissa's life took another surprising turn. Dressed in a simple yet elegant midnight blue gown, she mingled with donors, volunteers, and partners. She found herself in conversation with Alastair Harrington himself, an older gentleman known for his discreet but mighty influence in philanthropic circles. Alastair was accompanied by his nephew, Thaddeus Harrington, who was rumored to be taking on a leadership role in the family's philanthropic empire. Thaddeus was not the typical trust fund scion. He was soft-spoken, with intelligent brown eyes and a reflective manner. Instead of leading with small talk about the latest luxury escapade, he asked Clarissa about her projects, about the legal challenges of establishing new clinics in underprivileged communities. He listened intently, nodding along, occasionally interjecting with well-informed questions. Something about his gentle curiosity made Clarissa feel at ease. He had grown up around massive wealth, but there was a sincerity in him that resonated with her. In the weeks that followed, Thaddeus and Clarissa crossed paths often. Sometimes it was in official board meetings or panel discussions on philanthropic strategies. Other times they bumped into each other in the Harrington Foundation cafeteria, exchanging friendly conversation over lunch. Thaddeus demonstrated a deep sense of responsibility to his family's legacy, which had begun decades ago with Alastair's mission to combat global poverty. Despite never having to worry about money, Thaddeus chose to earn degrees in social policy and public health. He had spent months in remote corners of the world, assisting medical teams and documenting the healthcare crisis in vulnerable regions. Clarissa found herself drawn to his humility. He wasn't flashy or boisterous like James had been. He didn't brag about his latest acquisitions. Instead, he recounted stories of the children he'd met in rural clinics, the heartbreaks and triumphs of trying to save lives in places where resources were scarce. She admired his perspective and, little by little, felt her guard lower around him. Thaddeus, for his part, was equally intrigued by Clarissa's passion and resilience. He learned about her divorce through office gossip, but never pried. He sensed she was a woman who had experienced deep wounds, and he extended empathy rather than invasive questions. Over time, friendship blossomed into something that felt far more potent. Thaddeus asked Clarissa to join him for a coffee one evening to debrief after a particularly challenging conference. What was meant to be a quick conversation stretched into hours. They talked about their families, their dreams for the foundation, and the tension between business pragmatism and humanitarian goals. Clarissa felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of excitement and fear. She was not sure she was ready to let someone in again, especially a man from a wealthy background, albeit a philanthropic one. Yet Thaddeus's gentleness prevailed. He didn't push or rush, but instead offered his companionship. They began meeting for early morning walks around the reservoir, where they'd brainstorm new ideas and share personal anecdotes. A palpable tenderness grew between them. Months later, one evening after a successful fundraising event, Thaddeus leaned in and kissed Clarissa under a canopy of string lights. It was soft, cautious, and heartfelt. That night, Clarissa realized she might be ready to love again. Word of their relationship spread quietly through the Harrington Foundation. Alastair Harrington, though protective of his family's reputation, embraced the bond forming between Thaddeus and Clarissa. He recognized that Clarissa's intelligence and authenticity were good for his nephew, who had already been thrust into the swirling demands of philanthropic leadership. Many staff members cheered them on, happy to see two genuinely kind people find each other in a world often dominated by power dynamics. Clarissa was determined not to let this relationship overshadow her professional identity, so she worked just as diligently as before, perhaps even more. Thaddeus, too, maintained his separate responsibilities in the foundation, making a point of respecting Clarissa's role and authority. They navigated the complexities of an office romance by setting clear boundaries at work. Outside of the foundation's walls, however, their bond flourished in ways Clarissa never anticipated. She discovered that being with someone who shared her values ignited her spirit in a new and profound way. Meanwhile, James Holton continued his high-profile life, mostly oblivious to Clarissa's new path. He had moved into ever more daring ventures, dabbling in real estate developments in foreign cities and launching an e-commerce platform aimed at global expansion. He cultivated a public image of unstoppable success. Business magazines lauded him as a visionary. Talk shows invited him for interviews about entrepreneurship and the secrets of scaling businesses. Behind closed doors, however, James grappled with unspoken dissatisfaction. He found that each conquest, financial or romantic, felt hollow after the initial thrill dissipated. He cycled through relationships, each time hoping he'd discover someone who could excite him the way Clarissa once had. But he demanded total adoration, total compliance. Where Clarissa had once offered intellectual debate, these new women either lacked her depth or grew weary of James's insatiable ego. He consoled himself with lavish purchases, a new mansion in Bel Air, a private jet, and a yacht christened Everest's Peak. Yet, in the quiet moments, lying alone in his impossibly large bed, James found that none of it filled the void. A year and a half after the divorce, James was invited to be the keynote speaker at a luxury conference in Los Angeles. Surrounded by other magnates and socialites, James boasted about his new acquisitions and philanthropic pledges, though, in reality, he contributed only marginal sums to well-known causes for good PR. It was there he spotted a poster for a Harrington Foundation event taking place in the same hotel. The name Harrington caught his eye because of its philanthropic clout, but also because it reminded him of something. He vaguely recalled reading about the Harringtons, one of the oldest and most respected philanthropic families in the country. He strolled into the lobby, glancing at the elegantly designed invitations for the Harrington Foundation's gala dinner. He saw a list of the speakers, including Thaddeus Harrington, Alastair Harrington, and a certain Clarissa Caldwell. James froze. Seeing Clarissa's name printed on that program unleashed a wave of memories. He hadn't thought of her in many months. Though he had occasionally heard from mutual acquaintances that she had taken a new job, he never cared to learn the details. The swirl of curiosity gripped him. How had she landed a speaking role at a major philanthropic event in one of the most luxurious hotels in La? James couldn't resist. He had to see for himself. That evening, dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, he made his way to the grand ballroom where the gala was taking place. It was an invitation-only event, but James was resourceful and wealthy enough to improvise. He slipped the doorman a generous tip, claiming he had an urgent need to speak to one of the donors. With his signature confidence, James found himself stepping into the glittering world of the Harrington Foundation. The ballroom was bedecked with crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and tables laid with fine china. Men and women in elegant attire mingled, discussing social initiatives with excitement. James scanned the crowd and almost immediately spotted Clarissa. She was standing near the stage, engaged in conversation with an older gentleman, none other than Alastair Harrington himself. Clarissa wore a sleek gold gown that highlighted her graceful figure. James felt a knot tighten in his stomach. She looked confident, radiant, and notably happier than he recalled. He hovered at a distance, uncertain of his next move. Then it happened. Thaddeus Harrington approached, placing a hand on Clarissa's back. She turned, her face lighting up as Thaddeus smiled down at her. The older gentleman stepped away graciously, and Clarissa leaned in to whisper something to Thaddeus. Their familiarity, the closeness, it was all too apparent. Clarissa seemed to glow, her laughter unrestrained. The two of them walked toward a group of donors, arms lightly brushing. James's shock turned into a strange cocktail of jealousy and disbelief. Had Clarissa somehow enthralled a Harrington heir? As the night progressed, James lingered in the background, listening to the speeches. Clarissa took the stage at one point, speaking eloquently about the Foundation's legal initiatives to protect children's welfare in underprivileged regions. She was poised and knowledgeable, commanding the attention of the entire room. The woman who, in James's mind, had been left with nothing was now standing on a platform, receiving thunderous applause for her critical role in a global philanthropic mission. James swallowed hard. A swirl of emotions, regret, envy, curiosity gnawed at him. James retreated to the hotel bar afterward, unsettled by what he'd witnessed. He couldn't believe Clarissa was so heavily involved in the Harrington Foundation, let alone apparently romantically connected to Thaddeus Harrington. A wicked voice inside him whispered that perhaps it was all for money, that Clarissa had simply found a bigger fish. But part of him recalled her unwavering ethics, her deep conviction. She never chased wealth for the sake of status. If she was with Thaddeus Harrington, there must be real substance behind it. James nursed a drink, contemplating whether to approach her. His pride had always been one of his greatest assets and liabilities. He decided to swallow that pride, at least for a moment. He made his way back to the ballroom, scanning the thinning crowd. Clarissa was now off stage, chatting animatedly with a small group. Thaddeus stood beside her, listening attentively, smiling at her every word. James took a step closer and caught Clarissa's eye. The group's conversation halted as they noticed him. A flash of recognition swept across Clarissa's face, followed by a hint of discomfort. She politely excused herself from the group, asking them to give her a moment. Thaddeus looked at James curiously, as if sizing him up, then turned to Clarissa to confirm she was all right. She nodded, indicating she could handle the situation, and walked over to James. It was the first time they'd stood face to face since signing the divorce papers. He offered a tentative smile. "Hello, Clarissa," he said, voice laced with uncertainty. She returned a polite nod. "James, I didn't expect to see you here." Her tone was calm, but guarded. "I was attending a conference," he said, trying to sound casual. "Saw the gala was happening. I couldn't help but notice you on the program." He paused, glancing in Thaddeus's direction. "You're doing well, I see." Clarissa's eyes flickered with something James couldn't read, pity, perhaps, or mild contempt. "Yes, I'm doing what I love," she replied simply. "Thanks for asking." Awkward silence hung between them as the ambient chatter of the gala resumed. James cleared his throat. "This foundation, it's quite a big deal, and you're part of it. That's impressive." Clarissa's gaze was steady. "It's more than that, James. We're actually making a difference. We've set up clinics in underdeveloped regions, funded education programs, and lobbied for new child welfare legislation. It's not just talk. We're seeing real outcomes." James forced a polite smile. "I'm glad to hear it." He felt an inexplicable need to justify himself. "I've done some philanthropic work too, you know. My company sponsors. Well, we do some charity events." She nodded, but her expression was non-committal. "I hope it's meaningful for you." He suddenly felt like a child being scolded. "So," he ventured carefully, "I see you and Thaddeus Harrington seem close." Clarissa hesitated, evaluating whether or not to divulge personal details. Finally, she said, "We're together, yes." He's been an incredible partner in every sense. Something panged in James's chest. Perhaps it was jealousy or the sting of realizing that Clarissa was genuinely happy. "I see," he replied, trying and failing to mask the bitterness in his tone. The gall of it all, he had once thought Clarissa would never rebound from the devastation of their divorce. Yet here she was, confident, successful, and involved with someone from one of the most respected families in the philanthropic world. Meanwhile, James had spent the last months in a loop of superficial pleasures. Clarissa offered a small nod, signaling the conversation was near its end. "Thank you for coming by to say hello," she said, though it was clearly meant to close the discussion. Then she turned to rejoin Thaddeus, who welcomed her back with a reassuring hand on her shoulder. James lingered a moment, feeling strangely sidelined, as if he were watching a different reality where Clarissa was not only surviving but thriving. Against all odds, she had rebuilt her life, forging a future filled with purpose and genuine connection. Unsure of what to do, James slunk away to the exit, a hollow feeling expanding in his chest. After that night, James's curiosity morphed into an obsession. He began researching the Harrington Foundation, learning all he could about their projects and about Thaddeus Harrington. He discovered that Thaddeus held multiple advanced degrees, traveled the world for humanitarian missions, and was widely respected for his earnest commitment to improving lives. Social media posts showed Clarissa and Thaddeus at various events, opening a new school in Uganda, speaking at a youth leadership summit, even enjoying a casual day out at a local farmer's market. The more James uncovered, the more he felt an unsettling mixture of envy and yearning. He couldn't understand why it bothered him so much. He was the one who ended the marriage. He was the one who had fought to leave Clarissa with next to nothing. He should be indifferent. But each new picture hammered home a truth he had long avoided. Clarissa had always been someone special, someone with depth, integrity, and compassion. And he had thrown her away, expecting her to fade into irrelevance. In the weeks that followed, James found himself distracted in business meetings, his mind drifting back to Clarissa's luminous expression as she spoke on stage. His usual confidence wavered. Colleagues noticed he was more irritable, more prone to snapping at small mistakes. Aware that something was off, he tried to re-immerse himself in the adrenaline of new acquisitions and expansions, but it felt forced. The intangible spark that once fueled his ambition now flickered. One day, in a board meeting, he erupted at an associate who questioned a risky overseas venture. His harshness shocked the room into silence. Realizing he'd crossed a line, James ended the meeting abruptly. He locked himself in his office and stared at his reflection in the glass windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles. A pang of regret twisted in his stomach. Where had all that drive gotten him if he was now filled with emptiness? Facing the silent hum of his empty penthouse, James found himself replaying scenes from his marriage to Clarissa. He remembered the laughter, the late-night intellectual banter, the warmth of her presence. He recalled how she had believed in him, how she had defended his ideals before he became consumed with his own grandeur, how he had once promised to share a life of purpose alongside her. He realized, to his horror, that he had dismissed and demeaned those principles she stood for, only to now find himself adrift without them. In an uncharacteristic moment of introspection, James picked up his phone and dialed Eric Mortimer, one of his oldest friends. Eric was one of the few people who had remained somewhat honest with him through the years. When Eric answered, James invited him over for a private conversation. They settled in James's sprawling living room, the city lights glittering beyond the glass. James confided the strange longing that had consumed him since seeing Clarissa again. Eric listened thoughtfully, sipping the whiskey James offered. "I won't lie to you, James," Eric said gently. "You did Clarissa wrong. Anyone could see she was a genuine soul, and you pushed her away in favor of chasing." "I don't know illusions." James bristled but knew Eric was right. "I thought I'd be better off, richer, stronger. I thought she was holding me back with her moral crusades. But now, seeing her like that, succeeding in ways I never expected, and with someone so decent, it threw me. Eric nodded. Money, success, it's all fine. But it's not everything. If you want any peace, you have to confront what you've done, not just bury it in more business deals. But how? James asked, frustrated. I can't just walk up to Clarissa and say I'm sorry for everything. She's moved on. That may be so, Eric responded carefully, but you need to find a way to make amends, even if it's not for the sake of reconciliation. Maybe you should consider using some of your resources to do something meaningful, something aligned with the values she tried to share with you. The idea lodged in James's mind like a stubborn seed. At first, it felt humiliating. Why should he align his actions with Clarissa's values now? But the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. If there was any chance to salvage his own sense of integrity, he needed to do something selfless, something that didn't revolve around personal gain or public image. After all, he had built an empire. Surely he could divert resources to something that genuinely helped people. He scheduled a meeting with his legal counsel and executive board. They were taken aback when James announced he wanted to establish a philanthropic wing of his corporation, fully funded and dedicated to social welfare projects. He demanded that they find a project that was not only high impact, but also personally meaningful. Skepticism filled the room. Was this another marketing stunt? James insisted it wasn't. This time, it had to be real. The board asked for a few weeks to research viable options. During those weeks, James felt an unfamiliar pang of impatience. He found himself yearning to see the results of philanthropic initiatives. When the board returned with a list of potential endeavors ranging from building homeless shelters to sponsoring educational programs for underprivileged youth, James listened with rapt attention. For the first time, he engaged in these discussions not as a business tactic, but as a moral imperative. The board recommended partnering with established organizations to ensure efficiency and transparency. That night, James pored over the proposals, eventually focusing on an initiative to provide legal aid and housing support for domestic abuse survivors. He recalled how Clarissa used to fight for battered spouses at her clinic. He remembered the passion in her eyes when she spoke of the individuals she helped. Without hesitation, James ordered his team to develop this particular project. They would staff it with top legal minds, social workers, and mental health professionals. Funding would be substantial, and the center would be designed to address every aspect of survivors' needs. Once the plan was set in motion, James felt a spark of genuine purpose for the first time in years. He visited the under-construction center in a modest neighborhood outside La. He interacted with city council members, local non-profits, and even volunteer groups. The process was messy, complicated, and rife with challenges: permits, zoning issues, background checks, logistical constraints. Yet, James persisted. He leveraged his influence not to bulldoze opposition, but to secure resources and expedite approvals for a worthy cause. Word of his philanthropic efforts slowly made its way through social circles. Some dismissed it as mere PR. Others, including Eric Mortimer, saw a change in James's demeanor. He seemed less brash, more reflective. Late one afternoon, James stood amid the construction site, watching the framework of the new center take shape. The noise of drills and hammers echoed around him. For once, he felt that the noise signaled something constructive, not just another monument to his ego. It was around this time that Clarissa's path intersected with James's once more. The Harrington Foundation specialized in large-scale philanthropy, and part of Clarissa's role was to oversee grants to smaller but promising projects. She heard about James Holton's new initiative from a colleague who was vetting proposals. When Clarissa saw James's name on the application, she assumed it was a ploy. But curiosity got the better of her, and she dove into the documents. The proposed centre was impressively funded, with a clear, well-researched mission. Even the legal framework for domestic violence survivors' support was robust, shockingly so. Clarissa asked to visit the site and evaluate it for potential collaboration. The day she arrived, James was on location, wearing a hard hat, reviewing blueprints with architects and social workers. When he looked up and saw Clarissa approaching in a tailored suit and carrying a folder of documents, his heart rate spiked. This time, he felt genuine humility mixed with concern. Would she think he was manipulating her somehow? She walked over, professional composure intact. "I'm here on behalf of the Harrington Foundation," she said, her voice crisp. "We received your grant request. I'm assessing the project's viability." James nodded, gesturing for her to follow him inside the partially finished building. He explained how each room was designated for different services: legal counsel, therapy, childcare. He laid out the blueprint, pointing out emergency exit routes and specialized security features meant to protect survivors from potential threats. Clarissa listened quietly, taking notes and asking pointed questions. "Why this particular cause, James?" she finally asked, pausing in a quiet corridor. "You've never shown an interest in this kind of work before." His jaw tensed. "Because I realize it's important. I realize that people who are vulnerable need someone with resources to stand up for them. It's the right thing to do." She studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "And it has nothing to do with me?" Her question was laced with caution. James swallowed. "Initially, maybe you inspired it, but now it's grown beyond that. It's not just about you or even me. It's about doing something real." Clarissa contemplated his words. She sensed he wasn't lying, at least not entirely. Over the next several weeks, she and her team conducted a thorough review of James's initiative. Financial statements, staffing plans, partner organizations, all were scrutinized. Clarissa was meticulous, ensuring the project wasn't a vanity stunt. Oddly, the more she dug, the more impressed she became with the level of commitment. James and his team were showing, but her personal history with him complicated her objectivity. Thaddeus noticed her turmoil, asking if she was all right. She told him about the conflict, her ex-husband's surprising philanthropic endeavor. Thaddeus encouraged her to remain professional, reminding her she was fully capable of separating personal feelings from professional duty. He trusted her judgment implicitly. Clarissa took his words to heart, grateful that Thaddeus was secure enough not to feel threatened. On a warm Wednesday afternoon, Clarissa's team submitted their final recommendation to the Harrington Foundation Board. They concluded that James's centre was indeed worthy of funding, provided certain transparency measures remained in place. Alastair Harrington signed off on a substantial grant, ensuring that the centre would open with robust support. Clarissa delivered the news to James in person. He breathed a sigh of relief, a genuine, unguarded smile flickering on his face. "Thank you," he said. "I promise you won't regret it. I want this to succeed." Clarissa nodded, her expression measured. "I'm glad you're serious about it. Just remember, if you fail to uphold your end of the agreement, if this turns into another vanity project, the foundation will withdraw funding." James raised his hands in surrender. "Understood," he replied, determined. "I'll make sure it doesn't come to that." Construction wrapped up 3 months later. The grand opening was scheduled for a mild spring morning, and local community leaders, city officials, donors, and volunteers were invited. With the Harrington Foundation's seal of approval, media coverage was widespread but cautiously optimistic. James stood at the podium in a freshly tailored suit, looking somewhat nervous. He began his speech differently than anyone expected, reflecting on his own shortcomings. "I've always been focused on success, on numbers, on status," He confessed to the crowd. "I spent years believing those metrics defined me. It took a long time and some harsh lessons to realize that real success is measured by how we help others. This center is the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for the community we serve." Clarissa stood in the audience next to Thaddeus, who placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She watched James, uncertain of the swirl of emotions that rose in her: pride, relief, a lingering sadness for what they had lost, maybe all three. After the ribbon cutting, media outlets swarmed around James, peppering him with questions about the center, his philanthropic turn, and whether this signaled a permanent shift in his life's trajectory. He answered with measured humility, always directing attention back to the cause. Observing from the sidelines, Clarissa found herself strangely moved. She recalled the James she once knew, the young man with big dreams, a spark of idealism before greed and ego overshadowed him. In a quieter moment, Clarissa crossed paths with James near a refreshment table. She offered a small smile. "Congratulations," she said. "You've done something good here." He nodded. "Thanks. And thanks for helping to make it happen." A subtle pause stretched between them. James cleared his throat. "I know it's not my place anymore, but for whatever it's worth, I'm sorry truly for how I treated you." Clarissa's eyes glistened. She inhaled deeply, searching for words. "I appreciate that. I hope you keep this going, for your sake and for everyone who will need this place." As time passed, the center became a pillar of support for countless families in crisis. Survivors received legal guidance, therapy, and job placement assistance. Local news ran stories on the center's impact, highlighting one success after another. James stayed involved, visiting regularly and connecting with staff. He also diversified his philanthropic involvement, contributing to scholarships and environmental initiatives. It was as though a door had opened within him, letting compassion shape his decisions rather than pure ambition. Clarissa, meanwhile, continued to excel at the Harrington Foundation. She and Thaddeus grew even closer, traveling together to different countries for philanthropic missions. Their relationship matured into a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. While Clarissa was content, she also felt a weight lift from her shoulders after receiving James's apology. Part of her had needed that closure to confirm that she hadn't been crazy to believe in the man he once was. A year later, at a prestigious citywide event celebrating philanthropic achievements, the Harrington Foundation's leadership gathered at a luxurious ballroom in downtown Los Angeles. Awards were handed out to organizations that demonstrated exceptional community impact. Among them was James's Domestic Abuse Survivor Center. When his name was announced, James stood to receive the plaque. He walked on stage, humbly accepting the award. During his brief acceptance speech, James thanked not only his team, but also acknowledged the Harrington Foundation's early support. Then, in a rare public display, he looked directly at Clarissa, who stood beside Thaddeus in the audience. "And I owe a special thanks," James said, voice resonant with sincerity, "to Clarissa Caldwell, whose passion for justice and unwavering commitment to helping others inspired me, even when I was too blind to see it." Whispers filled the crowd. Clarissa felt Thaddeus gently squeeze her hand. A flood of emotions surged through her, but she kept her composure, offering James a nod of gratitude from where she stood. After the ceremony, the crowd mingled in the foyer. Journalists buzzed around, seeking sound bites from the honorees. Clarissa sipped a glass of sparkling water, feeling a sense of profound resolution. She spotted James across the room, flanked by reporters. His posture was relaxed, a far cry from the arrogant stance he once carried. Thaddeus turned to Clarissa. "Do you want to slip out early? The press is swarming," he teased gently. Clarissa laughed. "Maybe in a minute. I just want to take a breath." "This all feels surreal." Thaddeus kissed her forehead. "I'll get our coats," he said, allowing her a moment alone. She watched him walk away, gratitude warming her chest. She realized she had managed to create a life and found a partner far more fulfilling than the glamour she once shared with James. A short while later, James made his way over to Clarissa, the reporters now swirling around other notables. He looked tired but content. "Congratulations on your foundation's new educational program in East Africa," he said earnestly. "The results you've been posting are inspiring." She thanked him, acknowledging the hours of strategic planning her team had invested. They stood in a comfortable silence, neither quite sure what else needed to be said. Finally, James spoke. "I'm really happy for you, for everything you've accomplished, and for Thaddeus." Clarissa smiled gently. "I appreciate that. I'm happy for you too, James. You found a way to use your gifts to help people, and that's a powerful thing." He hesitated, appearing both nostalgic and hopeful. "Life is funny, isn't it? We think we know exactly what we want, and then it changes in ways we never expected." Clarissa nodded. "Yeah, life has a way of surprising us." They exchanged a final moment of mutual respect, a quiet acknowledgement of a once-shared past and the separate, fulfilling paths they each now walked. And so ended the chapter of James Holton mocking his ex-wife's supposed downfall, only to stand humbled by her remarkable comeback and her even more remarkable new partner. What began as a story of betrayal and bitterness evolved into a tale of growth, compassion, and second chances. Clarissa found not just love again, but a purpose that ignited her spirit and reshaped her destiny. James, once blinded by ambition, discovered that true wealth lies in the power to uplift others. The journey was never simple, nor was it free from pain, but every twist led them toward renewal. Their story reminds us that it's never too late to change course and embrace empathy over ego. Thank you for joining me on this emotional roller coaster of love, loss, and redemption. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that celebrate the resilience of the human heart. Your support means the world.